I don't know if you would call it depression or not, but I'm wondering now, they would say, well, I just don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what I'm here for.
No, in fact, they're not the same. Because there's a lot of things taught in Christianity that contribute to mental illness.
That brings to mind something I've actually heard a lot of people say is they believe that the thorn that God has given them is to have depression.
Objective wrong results in a sense of guilt. Now, the reason for that, guilt is to our soul, if you will, what pain is to our body.
Right.
Welcome to Design for More, sponsored by Come and Reason Ministries and Honey Lake Clinic. I'm joined today by Danielle Rome, who's one of our therapists here at Honey Lake Clinic, and Pastor Ed Anderson, who's one of our chaplains. And today our topic is a very serious topic that sadly affects far too many people in this world. It's the topic of major depression. And so Danielle and Pastor Ed, this is a serious topic.
Very serious.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay? And so as we talk about depression, depression is more than simply a sad mood. Depression is a clinical condition that affects brain and body. And in your work in the church and your work with patients, have you found that people sometimes misunderstand depression as something other than a physical illness?
Yeah. And then the unfortunate part in the things that I deal with, depression for some people is a lifestyle. It's not just a mindset, but it's a way that they live their life. They live their life on a daily basis depressed. Which is an unfortunate thing.
So I find that interesting because I wouldn't consider that daily they live. Maybe this is a good thing you brought up because you're using the word depression to mean maybe something different than I'm using the word.
Okay, so go ahead. You can define it.
Okay, and this is one of the, I think maybe the reasons why within the church and in the community there can often be disagreements within families. Some of our patients that I treat have a lot of stress because, well, my family doesn't think I should be on medicine, or my family thinks I can just pull myself up by my bootstraps, or my family thinks I'm a depressogenic person and just live a depressed life. Okay,
Right.
So maybe we're using the words differently.
Okay.
When I use the word depression as a psychiatrist, I'm talking about a clinical condition that affects brain function, that affects the body's immune system. And so when a person's in a state of clinical depression, the various brain circuits are out of balance. The part of the brain where you think and reason and plan and organize is underactive. So people have a hard time focusing and concentrating and problem solving. And the part of the brain where you experience a sense of connection and empathy with people is underactive. So people feel emotionally detached and like they're not loved anymore. And the part of the brain that gives you a sense of wrongdoing. It's a normal part of the brain. If you were to do something inappropriate socially, like in church, try to take your clothes off in the middle of the service, this part of the brain normally would then become active to give you an uncomfortable conviction. Don't do that. That's not appropriate. Stop it. Okay. Well, when somebody's depressed, that part of the brain is overactive, so they get the sense of inadequacy, like they're doing things wrong when they're not, or false guilt. They feel guilty when they haven't done anything. And the anxiety circuits are overreactive, so they feel stressed and worried, and the pleasure circuits don't work, so there's no joy when things go well. I'm pointing out to you that when a person has a clinical depression, we can see on various brain studies that the brain circuits are out of balance and their experience of life is altered by that. That affects the body's immune system, which increases stress and inflammatory cascades, which react back upon the brain, causing further brain changes. So this is a real clinical medical condition that people get into where their function is impaired, where their energy is low, their motivation, their sleep is altered, their appetite has changed, their thoughts become more dark and disturbed. They have thoughts about death because they're in a state of emotional distress and pain. I mean, this is a clinical medical condition.
Understood.
However, the word depression
is very broad then. So would you say that stress is a foundational piece of depression?
Well, I want to finish fleshing out what you said. Let's finish the clarification here. You said that you know people who their whole life is depressed.
They live their life. Now, here's the thing. Me making the statement is based upon what they say, not necessarily what I agree with, but based upon what people. I'm just so depressed. I'm so sad.
Okay, so there are depressed moods versus a major depressive medical clinical condition.
Correct.
So
yes, sir.
your dog gets hit by the car and gets killed. you will probably have a depressed mood.
Yeah.
Okay. You applied for a job that you have been really wanting and you didn't get it. You might have a depressed mood for a brief time.
Yeah.
But you work through it. Your functioning is maybe only off for a day or two because you just don't feel like going out and with your friends that night. And you stay home and kind of maybe cry a little bit or something. This is not depression, the clinical condition. This is a normal emotional response to a disappointment or a loss of some sort. Okay, that's not clinical depression.
Okay, I'm glad that you made that distinction. It makes sense.
But some people have what you say a depressogenic personality, but they're not in depression.
Okay.
They're pessimistic. They're negative. They have a chip on their shoulder. They're angry at the world. They've got some other element going on, but they go around with a very negative downer. They rain on everybody's parade. They're unhappy. They don't have any joy. This isn't the same thing either. This is a different process going on.
Okay.
This is making me think of people who have a diagnosis of clinical depression and end up basing a lot of their identity around it. I'm wondering what you've seen with that.
So that's another point. Okay, who am I? And so maybe you're describing people who have formed a identity around the sick role, and there are people who've done this.
Yeah,
they have had problems maybe since childhood. And those problems may not have originated with them, may have originated with a very dysfunctional family. And in the family, they ended up, this is a common dynamic in some families where an individual can take on the role of carrying the baggage, so to speak, of the family. Some people call it the black sheep of the family, okay? But the person can be the scapegoat of the family, the one who is always at fault in the family. And they learn and then they get sick and they get symptomatic, and then their sickness and symptomatic is the reason the family isn't doing well, so they get in treatment. When really, when we look at the family, they're often the healthiest person in the family. It's true. And the other family members are actually
dysfunctional.
but they form an identity. There's something wrong with me. And I'm broken in some way.
And to that point, and even what Danielle had said, the whole identity piece. So I'm going to present a scenario to you, and you let me know if you feel that this is considered depression or something else. So what about people who have an identity crisis, or they're trying to figure out what their purpose is, and because they don't know who they are or what their purpose is, they feel, air quotations, they would categorize it as depression. Now, would that be depression, or would they be considered something else?
So now you're describing the scenario in which people can have two conditions happening simultaneously.
Okay.
So just because you have one condition, say a identity disturbance, does not mean you cannot also enter into a clinical condition of depression. Okay. Or if somebody has depression, does not mean that person starting with depression can't also have a long-standing identity disturbance and then they become depressed. Depression is a clinical condition that can be brought about by a variety of reasons. So when somebody has that clinical condition of depression, there's a 2 weeks or more of functional impairment associated with a constellation of symptoms like alteration in mood, concentration, energy, sleep, appetite. Things are off. We're not the same. And it's severe enough that it impairs functioning. Once we make that diagnosis, if you've got clinical depression, as a treater, you still don't know what to treat because there are so many different causes of the state. In order to be effective in treating, you have to go beyond what is the person's depression? Yes, but now why? Oh, was this person depressed because they actually have a severe thyroid condition which can cause depression?
Wow.
And we need to treat the thyroid. Do they have a severe sleep disorder which can cause depression? We need to treat the sleep disorder. Are they in a dysfunctional marriage where they are being abused by an abusive spouse? That can contribute to depression. Do they have an addiction problem where they're drinking a bottle of vodka a day? That can cause depression. And so you have to go beyond. Okay, we know that the final common pathway, regardless of the contributing factors, is their neural circuits are out of balance, as I've described, and they have an inflammatory cascade, and they have these other changes going on that impair function. But what is it that's happened in their life that have pushed them in this direction? And that's where you want to take a deeper history and discover. Now, some individuals that have, say, identity disturbance, where they don't have a sense of internal strength, resilience, wholeness, sense of well-being. They're more vulnerable to the various factors in society and life that they react to with a much more intense emotional reactivity that then can lead to negative ruminating thoughts, depressogenic thoughts, and so forth, that can then cause a depression.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. That makes sense. And would would it be similar then for the person that's searching for what their purpose is? Because I've, as a pastor, there are times when people, I don't know if you would call it depression or not, but I'm wondering now, they would say, well, I just don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what I'm here for.
No, in fact, they're not the same.
Okay.
There are many people that have a clear, healthy sense of self. They're whole, they're confident, they have a purpose, they're on mission. And I've seen this with a lot of pastors.
Okay, yes.
Okay, they have a mission.
Yeah.
And they're on mission.
Yeah.
And then they get a clinical depression. And the pastors often get clinical depressions because they allow their lives to get out of balance. They take too much on themselves. They don't get proper rest and recovery. They maybe don't eat a healthy diet. They don't get adequate sleep. And they're doing it because they're on mission. Yeah. I've got this mission, this crisis, this problem, and they just push and push to the point, in some people, and historically have called that burnout or exhaustion. And sometimes it is just physical exhaustion, but for those who are genetically particularly vulnerable to depression, that exhaustion actually can lead to a clinical state of depression where they become suicidal, discouraged, hopeless, etc., even though they still have a saving relationship with the Lord, because the saving relationship with the Lord does not determine one's biological function in that moment. Okay? And the clinical depression is a biological condition. And so, but many people get trapped, particularly in Christian community, in this fraudulent thought process that, well, if I had more faith, I wouldn't have depression, especially if they have the pastor role or something. But and that's because they're not differentiating the clinical condition where the brain is not working well because of purposeful, perhaps, or other choices that have undermined sleep, undermined nutrition, overworked, not given proper rest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They haven't differentiated that from just the normal variations of mood that come and go.
Right. You made mention about if I had enough faith. I've recently met individuals believers, followers of Christ, who've been told that the reason why they have the problems they have in their life is because they don't have enough faith. They don't trust God enough, which has caused them to do a nosedive, because now the question is more so their relationship with God and things of that nature. And so would that be something that can send a person into clinical depression?
So this is a very difficult one, because there's a lot of things taught in Christianity that contribute to mental illness.
That's unfortunate.
And so you can't answer that with broad brushstrokes and say, it's always
this way,
this, or always that. You actually have to look at each individual case. What are your beliefs about God? Are your beliefs about God actually based in truth, reality? Or are they beliefs that come out of myth or superstition? And there are mythical and superstitious ideas about God taught in Christianity. Are they ideas, I can tell you in general principle, and I encourage people, if they want a resource, my second book, The God-Shaped Brain, How Our Beliefs About God Transform Our Life, it showed that our neurobiology changes based on the view of God we hold. And within Christianity, there's a variety of different views of God. There's an authoritarian, punishing God, which is the most common view in Christianity. And then there is a critical God, one who criticizes. And there's the benevolent God. And only about 23% of Christians see God as benevolent, compassionate, and kind, like Jesus revealed him to be. And then there's the distant and uncaring God, And only the God of love, as Jesus revealed, is healing to our being. And science and the studies show that worshiping a God of love, a benevolent God like Jesus, is healing to us. But an authoritarian God, a God we must be protected from, a punishing God, a rule-giving God, et cetera. This, you may believe and do all types of religious things, but it's actually harmful.
Can I just say this, Dr. Jennings? You probably don't know this, but you just said something that I'm sure most who are watching or listening right now just had like an explosion in their brain when you said that our relationship with God, or how we see our relationship with God, changes neurobiology. That Wow.
No. So this,
Yeah.
okay, so let's take just a little aside and explain why that's so, okay? The true God of reality is the creator of reality, who spoke into existence space, energy, matter, life. He creates. As creator, his laws are the laws upon which reality is built and functions. They're constants, like on the physical side, law of gravity, laws of physics, laws of health, okay?
Right.
You cannot have health while violating the laws of health. This is just how reality works.
Right.
Unfortunately, much of Christianity has taught that God's laws aren't really that way. God's laws are like man's laws. And we can't build reality, so we make up rules, and our rules require legal oversight and infliction of punishment. And much of Christianity teaches that God runs his kingdom this way. It's not true. What you just highlighted about we become like the God we admire and worship, it actually in 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, by beholding, we become changed. Or in Jeremiah, it says they worshiped worthless idols and became worthless themselves. Or Romans 1, Paul says they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and preferred images made with their own hands, and their minds became dark and depraved and futile. This is the law of worship, okay? Not the rule of do it or else. It is the law on how things are built. We actually become like what we esteem, revere, admire, look up to, value, cherish. We become like. We assimilate. We strive to practice those methods, and thus it becomes wired into our neurobiology. Okay? In psychiatry and psychology, we call this modeling, but the Bible calls it by beholding, we become changed. We become like that, okay? And it's described all through Scripture. And therefore, one of Satan's greatest attacks on Christianity is to not get people to deny the person by name Jesus Christ, but to replace the true attributes of Jesus Christ and God the Father with the attributes of himself.
Wow.
And he does that by getting people to accept the idea that the Creator functions like a creature.
Wow.
Okay? Wow. And how do creatures function? Creatures can't build reality, so creatures, you and me, make up rules and enforce our rules with punishment. And thus much of Christianity is bought into this idea. God's law works like our law, and therefore he has rules, and if you break them, he's required to punish. You're now worshiping a creature. You're not actually worshiping the Creator anymore.
Wow.
And this is harmful to us. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yes,
it does.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
and Dr. Jennings, I wanted to get some feedback also from Danielle, because there's a difference between her and us. I mean, just a little bit of difference. But what would be your take on what we're talking about as far as depression and just some of your experiences with patients and just in your personal life?
Absolutely. Well, what's looping in my mind right now is this idea of guilt. And if guilt is part of the biological symptom of depression, and that's also really used in the church for power and in part of that creating false beliefs about God, how do we help somebody resolve that guilt when it's also being influenced by the biology of the depression?
So,
Very good question.
No, that's a great question. We should in fact, we will do a show on guilt in the future.
That's a great idea.
No, we will. But to answer your question right now, there is appropriate guilt and inappropriate guilt. Appropriate guilt is guilt that we experience when we've actually done something wrong. That's appropriate guilt.
Right.
You've stolen from your neighbor.
Right.
You've cheated on your spouse. You've murdered somebody, whatever. Objective wrong results in a sense of guilt. Now, the reason for that, guilt is to our soul, if you will, what pain is to our body.
Right.
And if you touch a hot stove, and this is very interesting, you ask a group of people, ask a congregation, if you touch a hot stove and feel pain, is it bad to feel pain? Some in the audience will say yes.
Wow.
No, it's actually quite good if you're touching a hot stove to feel pain, because the pain will have you reflexively pull back and you will minimize the damage.
Right.
Yeah, there's a disease, a physical disease in the Bible that is a metaphor for the sin condition, and that is leprosy. Okay,
Right.
how leprosy works, it just destroys the pain fibers. That's all it does. It doesn't actually destroy tissue. But if you have no pain fibers, you touch a hot stove, you don't know you're touching a stove until you smell flesh burning, and therefore much more damage occurs. And so guilt, like pain, as you reach towards the hot stove, if you're very sensitive, you might actually feel the heat before you ever touch the stove and never get burned in the first place. So guilt is this, we have this capacity, the sensitivity to experience a sense of conviction or guilt to, as we approach things that damage our soul. And if we're very sensitive, we might, some friend might say, hey, let's cheat on our next exam. And you go, and you just recoil from even the idea of it.
Right.
Okay, you don't even consider it because you have a sensitive conscience. You don't have to do the act to recognize that would be harmful. If you're less sensitive, you might have to get burned and smell the flesh burning, okay? And so there's an appropriate guilt, and that's why we have it, to protect us from corrupting our character, damaging our souls, okay? But there's an inappropriate guilt. An inappropriate guilt is when you have the feeling of guilt, but you've actually done nothing wrong. An inappropriate guilt can come from this neural circuitry being out of balance, but it is always rooted in believing some falsehood. Inappropriate guilt's always so, and you can't tell the difference between appropriate and inappropriate guilt based on how it feels. Guilt feels like guilt. So if somebody feels guilt, the first question is to go, did I actually do something wrong?
Right.
And is the guilt directly related to that wrong? And there's other caveats about how we deceive ourselves. Like people will feel guilt for a wrong they did 37 years ago.
Wow. So how do you get a patient or a person to come out of that way of thinking? Because I know there's a lot of times when people walk into an issue of clinical depression based upon the whole guilt piece.
So one of the things, and so we want to offer some hope here in our show today, because we're talking about depression, and it's the number one cause of disability worldwide.
Wow.
Okay, and it's a life and death condition.
Wow.
If it's not treated, a certain percentage of people will die by suicide. Okay, it increases your risk of metabolic problems. So people with depression have higher risk of diabetes, obesity, heart disease. They die from heart attacks and strokes. They have higher risk of Alzheimer's, dementia as they age. This is a very physiologically harmful, the clinical state of depression, not the transient depressed mood because you're working through something.
Right.
But the clinical state of depression, and I want people to understand this is a treatable condition.
Okay.
And one of the problems when people get in a state of depression is they often lose hope. They feel they lose that sense of they're ever going to get out of it, and they can feel like they're in a black pit and they're stuck and life isn't worth living anymore and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And this leads to the idea of suicide, because suicide then becomes the escape from the pain and misery they're in. And I want people to understand, if you're in a state of depression or know somebody in depression, you help by letting them know this is a treatable condition. The church harms when the church tells people, well, there is no such thing. You just don't have faith. This isn't whatever. And so it keeps people trapped and makes them more hopeless. Okay? But this is treatable. And there's a variety of treatments. And the best treatment are holistic treatments. And that's what we do here at Honey Lake, is that we evaluate the person holistically. We want them to have the proper nutrition, because unhealthy diet. There's a study that showed that people who eat a lot of fast food and junk food have 40% higher rate of depression than people who don't.
Are you serious?
And it's not just because they're missing vitamins like vitamin B12 or B6 or something like this. It's because those foods are highly inflammatory foods, and the highly inflammatory foods cause the cascade of changes that contribute to depression in the brain. So anti-inflammatory food choices like the plant-based diets or the Mediterranean diet with fish oils and so forth, these are protective and reduce your risk of depression.
Wow.
Sedentary lifestyle, just sitting around, okay, that actually increases your risk of depression. Whereas an active lifestyle, getting regular exercise, is neurobiologically and physiologically healthy. It turns on all the proteins in our brain that helps our brain make new connections, so you'll learn better. Turns on mood elevators. You've probably heard of a runner's high and so forth. So it has an antidepressant benefit to exercise regularly. We have to evaluate sleep. I think it's 30% of Americans get less than adequate sleep a night. 30%. Well, sleep, there are 4 physical requirements to life. Air, water, food, and sleep. And so we want people to know, if you have depression, it's something you can do immediately at home, is just step back and say, am I doing everything that I currently know is physiologically healthy for my life? Okay, and if I can do it on my own, well, no, I don't get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I'm only getting 5. Well, I can do that on my own. I can actually reduce my caffeine. I can turn off the TV or my smart device, and I can go to bed earlier and get more sleep. That's something I do. I don't exercise. I can start walking, and the data shows a 20 to 30 minute walk 4 to 5 times a week has antidepressant benefit. I can start doing that. Okay. But if you've done the things and you're still struggling with depression, get professional help. Get evaluation. Get a good physical by your doctor. Maybe you have a thyroid problem. Maybe you have sleep apnea. Maybe there's some other treatable condition going on there. But don't lose hope.
No.
And then there is a place for medications, but medications are only one small, narrow, little slice of a treatment pie. And by themselves, they don't actually treat the totality of the population who struggles with depression.
Yeah. So what are some alternatives for medication for those who may not want to do the medication route?
So psychotherapy, depending on the severity, and there are certain forms of depression that get so severe people lose touch with reality, and they do need medication at that point. But a lot of people with depression, if they do the lifestyle things that get into good counseling, they can actually treat their depression that way. The data shows it's effective. Certain types of therapy that can be given. There are certain nutraceuticals that can have antidepressant benefit in conjunction with a lifestyle program, reducing inflammation. Resolving, but the idea here is resolving the identifiable contributing factors. So no matter what intervention you bring to bear, if you're not resolving the contributing factor, like there's a very dysfunctional marriage where somebody's getting beaten up regularly, you're likely not to resolve the depression as long as they're continually being exposed to that type of abuse.
Wow.
Okay. Wow. If they have a thought pattern of thinking, I'm no good, everything I do is wrong, people always hate me, I am the one nobody ever loves. If this is their pattern of thinking, that pattern of thinking will contribute to depression. They'll interpret life events in ways that are destructive. So that pattern of thinking might need counseling to change to a more reality-based pattern of thinking.
Wow.
That brings to mind something I've actually heard a lot of people say is they believe that the thorn that God has given them is to have depression, right? They say they've tried different things and nothing's working, so this is the lot God has for them in life, and they just need to embrace it.
Wow.
I've heard a surprising amount of people say that. I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are.
So I can't find any biblical evidence to support that. There's no question that God can bring certain obstacles and or trials to us and God can, not all are from him, let's be very clear. He can, but they're always to benefit us in some way and enable us to serve him more effectively. It is one of those things regarding how we gain strength. If you go to the gym and work out with a trainer and they start with 5-pound weights, very shortly they're going to get you to 10. And if you work and do your exercises, they're going to move you to 15. And after you've done that, they're going to move you to 20. Do you look to the trainer and say, look, every time I get successful, you keep making it harder. Okay? This is just, whether it's math, you learn basic math, and you move to algebra, then you move to calculus. If you stay on that journey of math, they keep adding difficulty, don't they? Okay? This is how it works when you're under the care of somebody who wants to develop you in any line. But depression, the clinical condition of depression, impairs development. It keeps people stagnant. So I will tell you that somebody who takes that line has made a rationalization because in some part of their life, they're avoiding responsibility. And the depression gives them the excuse to not have to take and shoulder some responsibility in life that God wants them to do. And they have rationalized that God has put the depression on them to excuse them from the responsibility. So they're now virtuous in their suffering while they're avoiding their actual duties.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
I can absolutely see that.
Okay. And this is another truth.
Yeah.
You can't help people who are not ready or willing to be helped.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And Jesus himself said he did not come for the healthy, but for the sick. I can't help those who believe they're already spiritually well and righteous and right with God. I can't do anything for them. I can help all those, though, who are meek and lowly in heart. Okay, and same thing as a doctor. Patients who deny they have a problem, you can't help them until they admit they have a problem.
Yeah.
I think I see the same thing as a pastor too. You can't help them until they admit that there's an issue that needs to be dealt with. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and so then other alternative treatments, there are other non-pharmaceutical treatments. There's something called transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is a device that gives magnetic pulses to the brain that activates the neural circuits. And my point is, if somebody's struggling with depression, this is completely treatable, and we can get people well.
I have a question for you too, Dr. Jennings. Is there any information that people can, anywhere people can go in order to get to the information that you're sharing today? I know that you've written books about some of the things that we're covering. Where can people go to get more information?
So thanks for that. And yeah, so I also want to say, if you're watching us on this podcast, we hope you are, that if you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover, you can email those into us at questions@designformore.net. Questions@designformore.net. And then there's several websites. A website, if you're interested in a program that might help you or your family, is Honey Lake Clinic. Just type in Honey Lake Clinic and you can find all about the program here. And then my ministry website is comeandreason.com. And comeandreason.com has a whole slew of resources, lectures, blogs, Bible studies, free resources we ship out to U.S. postal addresses at no cost. And then I have a variety of various books that you can identify from the website there as well if you're interested in those.
Thank you for joining us on Designed for More, brought to you by Come and Reason Ministries and Honey Lake Clinic. Also, don't forget to check out our other podcasts for more inspiring content.